Good morning, everyone. It's first of all, welcome everybody. It's great to see so many people coming to our SWOP breakfasts, and I think it says something about how we're all struggling to make sense of what is happening in our society. And it's for that reason that we've had this series of really interesting public intellectuals talking about those changes and how they relate to a particular vision where a lot of our disagreement and contestation is focused at the moment, and that is the vision of the National Development Plan for 2030. And so Karl is working with the labour movement, and in a way now as director of SWOP, is promoting a particular vision of what we call public sociology, or maybe that's a bit too narrow, rather talk about public engagement that combines high quality research with reaching out and connecting with people outside the university. He's also wonderfully placed to talk to us about our society in terms of the research he's done in places, and the variety of his research too. I'm thinking of his research on high-field steel, his research on Baragwanath, his research into key state institutions and movements from below, such as the so-called service delivery protest, or what Pete Alexander calls the rebellion of the poor. You know, the famous anthropologist Clifford Geertz once said that most people live in a state of informed bewilderment. And I think many of us are bewildered about what's happening all around us. And so special welcome to Karl, who I think will be giving us a map, in a way, of trying to see, understand current events. Thanks, Karl.
Well, thanks, Jackie. I really don't promise that you will leave the breakfast today less bewildered than when moment to talk about, because I suppose in a way I've got a leg inside and a leg outside. I'm a commissioner on the National Planning Commission. I'm the director of SWOP. I'm going to be talking as an intellectual who is part of the Planning Commission, but is also in a position to make critical comments about the plan. So my talk today is going to cover, well, 5 different aspects of the plan. Firstly, what kind of plan is the NDP? Secondly, I'm going to talk about the economic chapter in particular. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about beyond decent work, planning for decent life. And then fourth, I'm going to talk about the uses of the NDP, and fifth, the future of the NDP. But actually, in terms of the time available, I'm quite unlikely to be able to get to the fourth and fifth aspects of my talk, in which case I'll refer to them in passing and perhaps in discussion time. Can you hear me properly at the back? Okay, great. Okay, what kind of plan is the NDP? Well, the National Planning Commission consists of 25 part-time commissioners, plus the minister, who's obviously full-time. It has a secretariat of administrators and researchers, perhaps 20 to 25 people. It's located partly within government, but also partly outside of government machinery. And it has a mandate to develop a vision and a plan that covers the next 20 years. Such a body, in other words, a small body consisting of very part-time commissioners with a small secretariat, can produce an overarching vision and focus on a number of critical areas in which a real investment of resources and time and planning is required. But such a body cannot produce a detailed and comprehensive plan which integrates all aspects of government functioning. That's not possible for a commission constructed in such a way. It's also important to note the emphasis on the long term, on where we want to be in 20 years' time, not on resolving immediate crises. So given such a body, with all that it can do and what it can't do, what kind of document is the plan? I want to argue that it is the beginning of a process of long-term planning rather than the end. This necessarily means that it's an unfinished work. It's a work in progress. And following from this, it's an invitation to engage, to debate, to experiment, and to implement. Also following from that, it's a messy document, it's contradictory, and it's not necessarily coherent. These qualities mean that the National Development Plan cannot be regarded as a blueprint. Different sections of the plan operate at very different levels. Some present quite abstract, large-scale propositions. Others present very concrete details. In some cases, the plan points to necessary processes, and in others, it points to necessary end results. So this means that the plan in itself is very uneven in the kinds of projections and the kinds of proposals that it makes, which is not what a blueprint is. So therefore, it cannot constitute a blueprint. I read in the Daily Maverick the other day that the plan is an integrated whole, in which each section relates to each other section, and the relationship, the integration has been carefully worked through, and that therefore a piecemeal implementation of the plan is going to destroy the plan. I mean, this is nonsense. The plan is not constructed like that. An enormous amount of work still has to take place to integrate different elements of the plan. And I must say that in implementing a plan like this, a plan of government, hard choices have to be made, trade-offs have to be looked at, budgets have to be looked at. That has not happened so far with the plan. So in those respects, it's not a blueprint that you can sort of take into government and immediately implement. This relates, of course, to the fourth element of my talk, which is about the uses of the National Development Plan. And I think there's a lot to be said. I'm not going to have time today, really, which is a pity, but there's a lot to be said about the different uses to which the plan is being put, the way it's being appropriated into different discourses. For example, there was a headline in the Business Day last week saying that Pravin Gordhan, when he announces the midterm budget review, must announce the implementation of the National Development Plan, or it will be a disaster for South Africa. I mean, this kind of fetishization of the plan and sort of appropriating it into certain discourses to say what must or must not be done by different interest groups is very interesting. It's a kind of the life of the plan after it's written, and a lot more could be said about that. But let me move then to consider the economic chapter and the prospects for decent work. A lot of the heat, a lot of the arguments, a lot of the conflict over the plan focuses on this chapter. Now I must say that in my view this chapter is one of the weakest in the plan. It's pretty vague, it has very few concrete proposals. The targets for poverty and inequality are modest at best. And the overall thrust of this chapter is that we must continue as we are now, but just do it better. And that will be the path to a better future. I don't think this is good enough. There are a number of interesting proposals in the economic chapter, proposals that that could point in a different kind of direction, such as the emphasis on innovation and the emphasis on, for example, in state tenders, in industrial offsets that would lead to industrialization, much like what is happening with the passenger rail tender for locomotives and carriages now, in which case the contract is used to actually establish manufacturing facilities in South Africa. So the plan points in those directions, but doesn't say much about how those could be attained. Now, there are two possible readings of this, of the nature of this, the economic chapter, in the sense that it's the kind of targets that it presents and the kind of, I suppose, overall thrust that it suggests. The one reading is that it demonstrates the final exhaustion of this particular model of development. A second reading would be that the Commission recognizes the scale and intractability of the problem of unemployment, poverty, and inequality in South Africa, and hasn't rushed to make easy projections about what the future would look like. So the Planning Commission is not a team of politicians. We don't have to be elected at the next elections. We don't have to make promises that the public so desperately needs to or wants to hear. And so we make projections that, sorry, like the plan, my talk is different. Yeah, so we don't have to make political promises about what the what kind of results our policies will produce. So, for example, the National Growth Path promises 5 million jobs by 2020. There is a question. I mean, how many of us believe that what the National Growth Path presents will deliver 5 million jobs by 2020? And so to put that, in a sense, against the proposals of the NDP doesn't automatically mean that the modest proposals of the NDP are therefore somehow lacking in spirit or lacking in political will. To take another example, in the case of agriculture, and I think that this is one of the strong chapters in the plan. It's got a lot of detail and a lot of interesting proposals on how to grow agriculture and grow particularly labor-intensive agriculture, and we project that through the kind of interventions that we suggest, that something like 1 million jobs can be developed over a 20-year period in agriculture and associated industries. And this projection has been criticized on the grounds that it's less than what is presented in other plans of government. However, I think that the Planning Commission has taken quite a tough look at at ways of developing jobs, and has actually arrived at these figures based on its best kind of guesstimates, if you like, of what could be attained. And we think that there's more data to support the position that we put forward than there is in some of the other plans. And as I say, our projections are not based on the need to put is important, not only for the jobs that it produces, but also for the kinds of backwards and forward linkages, the other industries that it stimulates, the kinds of skills and technologies that are involved in manufacturing. So this is a really critical dimension of any economic policy, and its relative absence from the national plan is a serious problem. However, and I suppose, of course, another element of manufacturing and industrialization is that this is really where the heart of decent work is. So it's really important in terms of trying to produce decent jobs. But even if we do successfully implement an industrial strategy, how many jobs do we anticipate that can provide? The changing nature of manufacturing globally, the increasing capital intensity, suggests that even with a successful industrialization strategy. The number of jobs will be significant, but will not solve our unemployment problem. So how many jobs are we looking at? 1 million, 2 million? What kind of projection could we make on the basis of manufacturing? So I think it seems quite clear, certainly to us, to the Commission, that by 2030 there will still be a very large number of people who are located in indecent jobs. That is, insecure jobs, jobs that are not that well paid, jobs that it's difficult to unionize, informal sector jobs, service sector jobs, and of course more survivalist informal sector work. The old ILO vision of life centered on decent work, where the workplace is not only the place, not only the kind of source of a degree of meaning in people's lives because they've got work that is decent, but is also the source of rights and benefits, is not really a plausible solution to all our problems, at least over a 20-year period. That means that we have to think beyond work. And this is really where I think that the National Development Plan becomes interesting, is in some of the things that it talks about beyond the sphere of work and job creation. I must say as well that the idea of a decent life, in other words, shifting our thinking from the focus largely on decent work to the question of a decent life, this kind of way of framing the work that we're doing is an emerging idea within the National Development Plan. It's not something that has been comprehensively worked through. It's something that is still kind of needs to be thought through further and needs to be worked on in much more depth. So what does this mean, looking at a decent life, looking beyond planning for a decent life and not just for decent work? Well, there's a number of different areas, and I'm going to touch on a few of them. Let's see how much. So some of them are to do with improving immediate conditions of people's lives. So firstly, there's a very strong argument in the plan that we need to not only look at wages and incomes, we need to look at the cost of living. We need to find ways of reducing the cost of living. Much is always made in discussions about our economic prospects. Much is always made of the cost of doing business in South Africa. Much less is made of the cost of actually living, of surviving in South Africa. And the plan suggests that key factors for the poor and for the working class are the cost of food, the cost of transport, and the kind of spatial distribution of where people live and where shops are, where job opportunities are, and where services are. And all of this imposes very high costs, a burden of high costs, as well as a burden of time on those who live away from workplaces and the centers of service provision and so on. So the emphasis here is on it's trying to reduce the cost of living through reducing food prices, providing cheap, efficient public transport, and spatial planning, and changing the way cities are organized, the way the country as a whole is organized. And at the same time, providing high-quality public services, health and education being key ones for the poor and for the working class. Then there is a focus on addressing food security and the problem of malnutrition. And the plan proposes nutrition programs, early childhood development, and care programs. That's for children from the ages of about 1 to 3, as well as early childhood development programs, which refers to preschool schooling in a sense, and the need to develop those. The plan does not say an enormous amount about how to achieve those and how those should be organized. And that's why I say the plan is an unfinished work. It's an invitation to engage. It's an invitation to develop new ways of thinking about these things. How would we achieve food security? How would we make sure that the enormous number of children who actually experience malnutrition get access to food in a way that is efficient and effective and doesn't lead to profiteering and corruption? And then thirdly, there's an emphasis not only on early childhood development, but on primary health care, on alcohol abuse, and on violence. And in proposing ways of looking at these aspects of human development and community development, the plan suggests, for example, when you look at primary health care, at the moment primary health care is pretty much organized around clinics. And clinics that have got professional clinical services, and that community members who are sick have to come to the clinic. It does not have outreach health programs. It does not have community midwives. It does not have community health workers. It does not have the kind of extension work into home-based care and so on that our communities need, that our communities so desperately need. Particularly with the high burden of various kinds of diseases that are experienced in the community, HIV/AIDS being the obvious one, but other kinds of diseases as well, diseases and illnesses as well. There are really serious questions that face us, I think, as a country around the provision of social work, social welfare support for poor communities and struggling families and struggling individuals. So the grant system in South Africa is pretty well praised for reaching so many people, and I think South Africa is certainly among developing countries is one of the highest providers in terms of GDP of grants to, like, child support grants, old age pensions, and so on. But this has been at the expense of the provision of social work and community work support for struggling families, for orphan-headed households, for problems like alcohol abuse and violence and so on. And those are other areas that really need to be developed that the plan points towards. Then there is the plan's support for public works programs, particularly the community work program, which is a way of, at one and the same time, providing incomes for those who don't have access to work, providing work, meaningful work that is organized by communities and that is collectively organized for people, and at the same time building social infrastructure in communities. So, for example, in many of the community work programs, what happens is that communities define the growing and cooking of vegetables for children at school and for vulnerable households as being a key provision, a key kind of form of work that actually unemployed people can engage in communities, or building parks, or building roads. So that kind of provision of social infrastructure through the community work program, which builds community, builds social infrastructure at the same time, provides a kind of basic income for people, is very strongly supported by the plan, and actually we advocate that there should be a massive expansion of those programs. Then there is the redistribution of land. The plan makes some interesting, or rather points towards some interesting possibilities in this direction. It does beg a bigger question, I have to say, in a kind of parenthesis, which is the question of the control of productive assets in South Africa. It's quite remarkable that the engagement, the debate, the conflict between right and left, if you like, in South Africa centers so wholly on the number of jobs that will be created and the quality of jobs that will be created, as if the provision of jobs is the resolution of all the injustices of apartheid. So we talk about the kind of control of wealth, the control of productive assets, and that doesn't enter into the economic debate at all. It's really about which plan is going to produce the most jobs. And this seems to me to be a very limited way of looking at the problem of the distribution of wealth in South Africa post-apartheid. So, and I certainly can't claim that the plan addresses this problem, and indeed I think that it ought to address this problem, ought to start addressing this problem. But the one area that it does point to is the question of redistribution of land. Make some interesting proposals in relation to this, particularly, and here this is more, I would say, more a gesture than a plan, and that is points towards the problems of the communal land ownership areas, the previous bunch of standards. And what is to happen around the control of land there and the question about the agricultural potential of that land. The proposal in the plan is that the land tenure rights of agriculturalists need to be protected, and particularly the rights of women. These are patriarchal systems in which women generally have very few rights. But how we do that is not made clear by the plan. Nonetheless, it points towards it. And then there are the big kind of structural proposals of the plan, such as spatial planning to address spatial injustice. And I think here the plan is really very interesting and makes some very important proposals around developing a strong, efficient, and integrated